Hi everyone, it's Miss Melanie here. Welcome back for 3 more chapters of Sideways Stories from Wayside School by Sachar. Today we're going to be reading chapters 16 through 18. Chapter 16, DJ. DJ skipped up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jewell's room. He was grinning from ear to ear, from nose to chin, from here to there, and back again. "Hey, DJ," Todd shouted. "Glad to see you." Todd was a pushover for smiling faces. Mrs. Jules heard him. She began to write Todd's name on the board under discipline. But when she saw DJ's smile, she put down the chalk. "Good morning, DJ," she said. "What are you so happy about?" DJ grinned and shrugged his shoulders. Mrs. Jules smiled. Damien looked at the smile on Mrs. Jules' face, then at Todd's, and finally at DJ's. Then Damien smiled too. His smile was almost as big as DJ's. They were best friends. Once they saw the two of them smiling, the rest of the class couldn't help but smile. Rondi had a very cute one due to her 2 missing front teeth. Nobody had an ugly smile. Jason came to school late. He was very upset. But the first thing he saw was Damien's smile, and he felt a little bit better. Then he saw Rondi's toothless grin, and he even began to smile a little himself. But when he saw the piano on DJ's face, he fell laughing onto the floor. Everybody started to laugh, even Kathy, and she hardly ever laughed except when someone hurt himself. The whole room seemed to be laughing, not just the people in it. The blackboard chuckled, the ceiling snickered, the desks were jumping up and down, and the chairs were slapping one another on the back. The floor was very ticklish. It laughed until the walls turned purple. The wastepaper basket started to sing, and all the pencils stood up and danced. Finally, things began to settle down. Mrs. Jules wiped her eyes and said, "DJ, why don't you tell the class why you were so happy? At least let us know what we're laughing about." But DJ just kept on smiling. "Oh, come on, DJ," said Dee Dee, "tell us." DJ didn't say a word. He couldn't. His mouth was stretched out of shape. "Let us guess," said Ron. "If we guess right, will you tell us?" DJ nodded his head. His smile began to hurt his ears. Everyone took one guess. "Have you been swimming? Is it your birthday? Are you in love? Did you get a green ball?" Nobody guessed right. At recess, DJ was still smiling. Lewis, the yard teacher, called, "Hey, DJ, come here." They walked to the far corner of the playground where they were alone. "What's up, DJ?" Lewis asked. DJ just smiled. "Come on, DJ, you can tell me. Why are you so happy?" DJ looked up at him, and he said, "You need a reason to be sad. You don't need a reason to be happy." And that's so true. I think this is my favorite chapter out of the whole book. Well, let's see, we still have more to go. So, chapter 17, John. John had light brown hair and a round head. He was Joe's best friend. John was one of the smartest boys in Mrs. Jules' class. But he had one problem. He could only read words written upside down. That's a big problem. Nobody ever wrote anything upside down, but it was only a little problem. John was still in the high reading group. He just turned his book upside down. It was easier for John to turn his book upside down than to learn to read correctly. But the easiest way isn't always the best way. Mrs. Jules said, "John, you can't go on reading like this. You can't spend the rest of your life turning your books upside down." "Why not?" asked John. "Because I said so," said Mrs. Jules. "Besides, what happens when I write something on the blackboard? You can't turn the blackboard upside down." "No, I guess you're right," said John. "I know I'm right," said Mrs. Jules. "You are going to have to learn to stand on your head." John couldn't stand on his head. He had given up trying. You would have too if you had fallen over as many times as he had. Joe was John's best friend. He could stand on John's head. Every time John fell over, Joe stood on his head. After all, what are best friends for? "My head is too round, Mrs. Jules. I can't stand on it," said John. "Of course you can, John," said Mrs. Jules. "If Joe can stand on your head, so can you." "It's easy, John," said Joe. "I can't," John repeated. "I always fall over." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Jules. "All you have to do is find your center of balance. Now, up you go." So John put his round head on the floor and swung his legs up, and he fell right over. Then Joe stood on John's head. "See, John, it's easy. Nothing to it," Joe said. "We'll help you, John," said Mrs. Jules. "Joe, get off John's head and get me the pillow from under my desk. Nancy, Calvin, come here and give us a hand." Mrs. Jules took the pillow from Joe and set it on the floor. "All right, John, we'll surround you. We won't let you fall." John put his head on the pillow and swung his legs up. He started to fall one way, but Nancy pushed him back up. Then he started to fall the other way, but Calvin straightened him out. John kept falling a little bit this way and that way, until at last he found his center of balance. And then in the book, this is written upside down, so this is going to confuse Miss Melanie. "Hey, look at me," said John. "I'm up, I'm really up. I'm standing on my head. I found my center of balance. It's beautiful. I can read the blackboard. Hey, Calvin, bring me a book and you don't have to turn it upside down." Ha ha ha. Hey, ooh, ah! John fell flat on his face. "You better stay off my head, Joe," he warned. "Are you all right, John?" asked Mrs. Jules. "Yes, I think so. I feel a little funny. Hey, I can still read the blackboard and I'm not upside down. I can read right side up now. When I fell, I must have flipped my brain or something." "That's wonderful, John," said Mrs. Jules. "Here, put the pillow back under my desk. As a reward, you may have a Tootsie Roll Pop. They are in the coffee can on top of my desk." John placed the pillow on top of her desk, and then he looked under the desk, but he couldn't find the Tootsie Roll Pops anywhere. Wonder where they are. Our next chapter, chapter 18, is Leslie. Leslie had 5 fingers on each hand and 5 toes on each foot. For each hand, she had an arm, and for each foot, she had a leg. She was a very lucky girl. And she had 2 lovely long brown pigtails that reached all the way down to her waist. When Mrs. Jules asked a question, Leslie could raise one of her hands. When Leslie was adding, she could count on her fingers. And when Paul pulled one of her pigtails, she could kick him with one foot while standing on the other. But Leslie had one problem. She didn't know what to do with her toes. She had 10 adorable little toes and nothing to do with them. As far as she could tell, they served no purpose. "Suck your toes. That's what I do," said Sherry. Ugh. But Leslie's foot wouldn't reach her mouth. That's a good thing. "Well, that's all toes are good for," said Sherry. She put her foot in her mouth and went to sleep. No, thought Leslie, they must be good for something. They just have to be. During recess, she asked Dana, Dana, what do you do with your toes? I scratch the back of my legs, said Dana. First, I scratch my left leg with my right foot, then I scratch my right leg with my left foot. But my legs don't itch, said Leslie. That's good, said Dana. In that case, you can scratch my legs. With your help, I can scratch both legs at the same time. No, never mind, said Leslie. She walked up behind Louis, the yard teacher, and hopped on his shoulders. Louis, said Leslie, I don't know what to do with my toes. Louis tugged her foot. Yes, that is a serious problem, he said, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take them off your hands for you, or rather your feet. Let's cut them off and give them to me. What? Asked Leslie. You don't want them, so I'll take them, said Louis. You won't have to worry about them ever again. I think he's teasing her, right? Louis is silly. No, said Leslie. I'll give them to Miss Mush, said Louis. She can make little hot dogs out of them. Miss Mush was the lunch teacher. No, I'm not going to give my toes away, said Leslie. All right, said Louis. I'll give you a nickel apiece for them. No, you can't have them, said Leslie. Why not? Louis asked. They're no good to you anyhow. And think of all you can buy for 50 cents. The bell rang. I'll think it over, said Leslie, and she ran back to class. Mrs. Jules, said Leslie, I don't see any reason for keeping my toes. Oh, Leslie, I'm sure there are lots of good reasons, said Mrs. Jules. Well, I can't think of any. My legs don't itch, and I can't get my foot in my mouth. Louis offered me a nickel apiece for them, and it seems to me like a good deal, but I wanted to check with you first. I think Louis was pulling your leg, said Mrs. Jules. No, said Leslie, he was pulling my toes. What would he want with your toes? Asked Mrs. Jules. I don't know, said Leslie, but if he's willing to give me 5 cents apiece for them, then I'm going to take him up on it. That's 50 cents. At lunch, Leslie walked up to Louis. Okay, Louis, she said, you can have my toes for a nickel apiece. That will be 50 cents. Not so fast, said Louis. Let me look at them first. Leslie took off her shoes. Yes, said Louis. The big ones are good and the ones next to them, but the most I'll give you for the rest of your toes is 3 cents each. Leslie was furious. 3 cents each? You told me 5 at recess. I'll give you 5 cents for the big ones, but just look at that scrawny little runt of a toe on the end there. You're lucky to be getting even 3 cents for it. I think you're getting a darn good deal. I happen to like that toe, said Leslie. Fine then, said Louis. Keep it. I'll just take the 2 big toes, and we'll call it square. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a dime. Nothing doing, said Leslie. These toes are sold as a set. It's either all 10 for 50 cents or no deal. What am I going to do with just 8 toes? Then forget it, said Louis. I'm not going to give you a nickel for those scrawny little end toes. Fine, said Leslie. No deal. My toes will still be here when you change your mind. She turned and walked toward the hopscotch area. Wait a second, Louis called. I'll give you $1 for each of your pigtails. Leslie turned around and looked at him with fiery eyes. Cut my hair, she exclaimed. Are you crazy? So that was chapters 16, 17, and 18 from Sideways Stories from Wayside School. And I would like to thank HarperCollins Children's Books for letting us read this to you. And join us next week whenever we read our next 3 chapters. Bye-bye, guys. Have a nice week.